Hi everyone, welcome back to Extra Credit, and this is our 9th episode on ancient Greece. So last time we left off on yet another cliffhanger in September of 490 BC, as the hopelessly outnumbered Athenians got ready to face down the overwhelming might of Persia at the field of Marathon. The Battle of Marathon would become the first official battle of the Persian Wars, and together with Thermopylae and Salamis, it's often remembered as one of the big three conflicts that really changed world history in immeasurably massive ways that would just come...
I'm over here. What about me? What about me? Come on.
Okay, what am I hearing now? There's like a voice or like what?
Oh,
it's the Battle of Plataea. Oh, hi, Battle of Plataea. Yeah, did you want to say something?
Yeah, how come you didn't talk about me? I'm like the most underrated battle of all time. I was so important. And if it wasn't for me, there wouldn't even be an ancient Greece to remember.
And back to Marathon. So to pick up directly with the dramatic scene that we left off last time, as he stood on the hill above Marathon with the eyes of history upon him and the overwhelming might of Persia in front of him, the Athenian polemarch Callimachus made the fateful decision to cast his tie-breaking vote in favor of war, meaning that the battle to come would be an all-or-nothing contest with death or glory as the prize. Or two for the price of one. But as the Greeks suited up and tried to steady their shaking nerves, the Athenian general Miltiades knew that to overcome the overwhelming odds against them would require a little bit more creativity than usual. Thus, as he began to give the marching orders, Miltiades took the unusual step of stretching the original hoplite phalanx rectangle out into a long, unbroken line, which would match the width of Darius's army. For an even bigger twist, he then made the center even weaker by packing the left and right flanks with more men. The idea here was that even if the Athenian center would break, the flanks would be strong enough to circle around and crush the Persians between them if all went according to plan. Which is what always happens in battle, right? And so, in the dramatic words of Herodotus, with everyone now at battle stations, the signal was given to the Athenians, who advanced towards the barbarians at a run. When the Persians observed the Athenians bearing down on them at full tilt, they set about bracing themselves for the impact. Now, exactly how far the Athenians had to run here is a point of some disagreement. Herodotus says it was a full mile, but seeing as they were all decked out in full hoplite armor and still had, a battle to fight, that seems kind of unlikely. Instead, most historians think that the Greeks probably just sprinted for the last couple hundred meters or so to give them an extra speed burst as they got within range of the deadly Persian archers. Either way, as the Athenians and their brave Plataean allies mustered up their courage, said one final prayer to their gods, and slammed into the Persians, the fight for the future of Greece had finally begun. Now, details of the battle itself are understandably sketchy, what with all the chaos and screaming going on, but if Marathon was like any other hoplite battle, you can imagine that it unfolded in a grinding agony of blood, sweat, tears, and death. As foot soldiers hacked and stabbed with their swords and spears, trying to force an opening in the enemy lines, archers from either side, and in this case particularly the Persian side, poured a hail of arrows onto their heads. Now, none of this exactly sounds like a barrel of laughs, but it was especially nerve-wracking for the man in the horribly exposed position at the far right-hand side of the Greek front line, which is exactly where our brave friend Callimachus found himself. But as hard-pressed as he was, the courageous polemarch managed to keep his head and hold his ground for the entire battle, which according to Herodotus lasted for an agonizingly long time. But on that momentous day, fate smiled on the underdogs, because at Marathon, things did actually go entirely according to plan. More specifically, the Greek plan. Just as Miltiades predicted, the Persians' superior numbers did allow them to break a hole through the center of the weaker Athenian front line. But instead of losing heart and heading for the hills, as I'm sure some of them were tempted to do, the Greeks on the heavily stacked left and right flanks kept their courage and the pressure up, pushing the barbarians back further and further. Slowly but surely, the Athenians gained ground, forming a deadly pincher around Darius's much more numerous, but much less heavily armed troops. And the game changer at Marathon really was the armor, or in the Persian case, the lack of it. As you remember, while the Greeks came fully loaded with bronze and iron, the Persian body armor was actually made of quilted fabric, with wicker shields made of woven plant material. Now, as bizarre as that may sound, this kind of lighter armor actually did hold up well against other ancient armies, but bringing it to Marathon to face hoplites was pretty much the equivalent of bringing a knife to a gunfight. Or in this case, a dishcloth to an anvil fight. So with the momentum tilting ever more heavily in favor of the Greeks, the scales finally tipped when, according to Herodotus, the Persians turned tail and the Athenians set off after them, hacking away until they reached the sea. Exhausted but elated, the triumphant Greeks stormed after their fleeing enemies, striking down anyone within arm's length, while the Persians frantically scrambled to reach the safety of their ships. Tragically, after holding his ground for the entire battle, it was now in the closing stages that Callimachus himself was struck down, along with one of the Athenian generals named Stesilaos. But as shell-shocked as they certainly were, the Persians weren't ready to throw in the towel just yet. In one last effort to save their expedition from total disaster, the Persians jumped back aboard their ships and sailed off around the headland to find a new landing site from which they could take the city of Athens itself by storm. Terrified that their miraculous victory was suddenly about to be snatched away, the worn-out Greeks summoned up their last reserves of energy for a truly epic task. Crushed by the weight of their armor and still reeling from the shock of battle, the Athenians somehow found the will to stagger 26 miles back home just in time to block the Persian ships and save their city from destruction. A truly heroic feat that would go down in history as the first ever marathon race. Faced with such an undeniable show of courage and strength, the Persians had no choice now but to admit defeat and set sail for home, leaving behind them an astonishing 6,400 of their own dead, next to a Greek tally of 192. As for the icing on the cake, it was now, as the Athenians were finally breathing their first well-earned sigh of relief, that who should show up ready to save the day but the Spartans. But despite being rather embarrassingly late for the party, the Spartans still insisted on taking a tour of the battlefield, where they were amazed to see so many dead Persians alongside so few dead Greeks. Then, just as quickly as they had come, the Spartans departed, praising the Athenians and their achievement. And the Athenians were like, yeah, anytime. In the end, the 192 Athenians who did fall in the battle were given a special burial right on the site itself, in a great mound that can still be visited to this day. Whereas the survivors were graced with the magnificent title of Marathonomakoi, meaning the men who fought at Marathon, and were treated like living legends for the rest of their lives. Speaking of legends, it wasn't long before all kinds of incredible stories were being told about the battle itself, with some of them less than completely accurate. The most famous of these featured our good friend Philippides, whose incredible efforts in our last episode had gone completely unrewarded. According to a later legend, Philippides himself was actually present at the battle, and when it was clear the Athenians had won, he turned and sprinted the 26 miles back to Athens, announcing victory in the city square before collapsing dead from exhaustion. Which, does make a pretty good painting. But in reality, the Athenian victory at Marathon in 490 BC would go down in history as one of the most glorious moments from the long centuries of Greek civilization. Not only did it give the Greeks a much-needed kick of confidence that the supposedly invincible Persians could actually be beaten, but it also gave the Athenians in particular a swagger in their step as the first Greeks to give the barbarians their first black eye. From this point on, Miltiades' fateful prophecy to Callimachus in the moments before the battle would prove to be more and more true, namely that the incredible triumph of Athens had indeed set it on the path to becoming the greatest city in all of Greece. But in the weeks and months after the battle, any hopes that the great King Darius would simply forgive and forget his humiliation were sorely mistaken. Because as Darius himself now was more determined than ever to prove, if these puny Greeks thought they had seen and survived the full wrath of Persia, they hadn't seen anything yet. See you next time. Hey everyone, thank you so much for watching Extra Credit once again, and now we are really into the thick of this story, and it's just gonna keep on getting better and better from here. Your pop quiz for this week is how many Athenians died at the Battle of Marathon? As usual, drop off your answer in room 215. As always, work hard, read books, play outside, and we'll see you next time.